You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Very good Wednesday evening to you, and welcome to another episode of Haunted Histories, the show looking at the past and the paranormal on Parasearch Radio, with me, your host, Penny G. Morgan. Last week, we had a good long chat with Dee Dee Mason of Goth Angel Productions, which I hope you really enjoyed. I have to say that our total conversation was condensed somewhat, as we talked for probably over 4 hours in total. But I hope that it gave you an insight into Coventry that maybe you would have never realised previously, and that there are most definitely places to go and visit there which would get your interest and get your paranormal juices flowing. I decided to follow on the format of last week by, rather than you having to listen to me waffle on for half an hour before we got to hear from my interesting guest, that when I have someone coming on the show who has a knowledge which surpasses anything which I could research, it was pointless not to introduce them sooner. So, shortly, I will be asking Simon Entwistle of Top Hat Tours to join us. But before that, let me tell you a bit about Simon. Now, Simon's tours are based in the Ribble Valley in Lancashire, and this place is the holder of probably many mystical legends. And Simon, if you go and have a look on his website, you will see he dresses in his favourite Victorian period outfit and is the man to recount some of his favourite tales as he accompanies you on his guided walks exploring the haunted ginnels, that's narrow alleyways to you and me down here, and cobbled streets and burial grounds in places like Clitheroe, Whalley, he'll tell me how to pronounce it in a minute, I'm sure, Blackburn, Accrington, Colne, Skipton, York and Kendal. In addition to this, he also provides tours in Pendle Witch Country and tours of the Ribble Valley, places like Botany Bay, Chorley, Boundary Mills and again Colne. Now these are sometimes walking tours, but also coach-based tours as well. But if you want to get an idea and you fancy going up to Lancashire for the weekend, and it is a very lovely place, I have, if you've listened to any of my shows, you'll know full well my mum is from Lancashire, so I have that rose very much embedded in my head. Check out his webpage, tophattours.co.uk, if you want to get more of an idea. But as we are going to be focusing on a specific part of Lancashire's history, the Pendle Witches, tonight, you can see why, as probably one of the top guides to that subject and one of the Pendle Witch specialists in this country, Simon is an excellent co-host for me to have. So, Simon, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Penny. Nice to hear from you.
Thank you. So, you obviously, with your job that you do, you have a very big interest in history. How did that passion begin?
Well, I think really we'll turn the clock back to the 1970s when I joined the army. And I was sent to a place called Strensall Barracks, which are right next to the city of York.
Right.
And I remember my first weekend leave. I went into the city of York and became absolutely infatuated with the Stone Gate, the Shambles, Whitmer Gate.
Yep. Oh, that's awesome. Nobody believes me that road exists. Nobody down south who's not been to... I've had to take photos of it for people to prove to them that Whitmer Gate is real. Because people who've never been to York think I'm joking when I tell them there's a road called Whitmer Gate. You can verify for me. It's true, isn't it? It is true. It
Very,
really does
very
exist.
true.
Yes.
It is indeed where one of the Pendle witches were actually executed
Really?
way back in July. Oh, yes,
Ah.
yeah. A young girl called Jeanette Preston.
Oh, right. Okay. I never knew that. Is that why it's called Whitmer Watmer? Because it's an execution site?
Yes,
Or...
Whitmar, Watmar, Yorkshire twang. Women were treated, terribly, right up to the days of Emmeline Pankhurst.
Yes.
And, many a young woman lost her life at Whitmer Watmergate.
Really? Wow. Because isn't it also the shortest street in York?
It is indeed. That's the shortest street in the city of York, at the far end of the shambles.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you there because I did mention to you I have a love of York as well. So you were based near York and you fell in love with the place and the shambles and all the different gates and the stone wall and all of that kind of thing.
I did indeed. And of course, at night time, Penny, there are about 12 individual guided ghost walks in York. Yeah. They're all very good guides. And I met a chap called Tony Mercer way back in the late 1970s. He's a local man, and I find that the best tour guides are local people that really know the area very, very well. Yeah. It was really through him that I took an actual interest in ghost walks. Right. And when I left the army in 1981, I started tours in a similar fashion. And, of course, over that period of time, you do pick up a lot of information, lots of stories, and use them for the tours, of course.
Yeah. I have actually done, I don't think it was officially meant to be a ghost tour of York. It was more of a history tour of York. And I don't know who, this must have been 20 years ago now I did it. And I must admit, the person who took us round, he was amazing. He was actually, when he was recounting, I think it was the story of York Minster and the dog being bricked up. The dog or something being bricked up in the walls because it wouldn't stop talking. He actually had someone crying. He was recounting it so well.
Yeah.
He had someone cry. I would say I was fascinated by the history side, and I was plaguing him with questions. But it was. Those kind of tours. It's such a cool way to learn about a place because they do take you places that you wouldn't otherwise know had been there before. So that's how you got into that whole thing. It was being impressed by this. And what made you What made you choose the Ribble Valley?
Well, because I lived in the valley at the time.
Right.
And the Ribble Valley does have some amazing stories. Half the valley was in the West Riding of Yorkshire, half the valley in Lancashire. And, of course, you have this brooding hill. In fact, as I talk to you, I can look out of my window and I can see this beautiful hill called Pendle Hill. Right. And, of course, the story of the Pendle witches is so well known. What does amaze me is that on Halloween, Pendle Hill looks more like Wembley Stadium.
Really?
Thousands and thousands of people from all over the world, all over the country will come to Pendle Hill for Halloween.
So are those people coming out of respect or coming for a bit of a jolly or...?
I think it's mainly because we always associate Halloween with witches on broomsticks. And it's become very, very...
thinnest and all that kind of thing.
It's become very commercial, really. Very, very commercial.
Yeah. Wow. So do you... Actually, just before we start talking about the Pendle witches and a bit more to do with them, do you have many people come to almost pay homage to them? Like people who admired them or feel that they're witches themselves?
Oh, I've come across those, okay.
Right.
I do get that tell me that they actually do work within modern witchcraft.
Right.
And there are some people who are very, very sympathetic to the cause of the Pendle witches.
Yeah.
But I get a variety of people. But the actual story itself, Penny, it's if Steven Spielberg got his teeth into it, he would have a Hollywood thriller. Yeah. Because you got everything associated with a Hollywood thriller. Yeah. And although the story's over 400 years old, it still really just captures the imagination of a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, one of the reasons I like history is you don't need an imagination. I have got an imagination, I have a very vivid imagination, but you can read some of these events in history that when you were taught them in school in a kind of blah, blah, blah way, they're kind of not that interesting. But when you actually read them and read into them, like you say, they would make blockbuster films because there's everything. There's, there's the murder, there's the intrigue, there's the betrayal, there's the whatever things make a film. I mean, when we sort of say talking about Lancashire and Yorkshire, the War of the Roses. When you look into that and the sort of main players in it, the Warwick the Kingmaker, people like Margaret Sanju, and all those kind of amazing characters, it is astonishing. It really happened. It's got so much theatricalness to it. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. So do you have a favourite tour that you do? Or is it the Pendle?
I do enjoy the Pendle tours, but I conduct a tour here in Lancashire called the Victorian Murders.
Right.
And there's an awful lot to choose from. And I do find some of the murders quite fascinating, particularly the Victorian murders, poisonings and shootings, etc. Right. And it is actually quite interesting going to a murder scene and bringing the story to life from the actual murder scene. And it's when I look at my tours, it's a bit like storytelling, but from the actual locations. And that's what I really enjoy, telling the stories.
Well, maybe I'll come up to Lancashire at some point. I haven't been up there for a while.
Right.
I do. Well, as I say, I do love it up there, so it wouldn't be a hardship for me. So let's talk about the Pendle Witches. Can you summarise to anyone who's not really heard of them who they were? Why are they so famous?
Right. The story is quite intriguing, really. Mm-hmm. The reason the Pendle Witches are so famous is that 8 of them actually confessed to witchcraft. They believed they really, really were witches. Right. The only window we have into this whole story is a book written in the year 1613 by a gentleman called Thomas Potts. And Thomas Potts was the clerk to the courts at Lancaster. He came from the city of London. He was sent up on the woods of King James to record all the proceedings. And in 1613, he produced this book. And that's why we have an insight into the actual trial. Potts made it very, very clear that under British law, these people were not tortured, but many people would disagree because when you look at the state of health of some of them, they were lapsing in and out of consciousness, suffering from malnutrition. And indeed, one of them, Demdike, alias Elizabeth Southern, actually died in jail before the trials began.
But she was an amazing age, wasn't she? For 1612, 1613, wasn't she 80 years old?
Quite right.
That's amazing age for those days.
It was. She was over 85 years old. Wow. And so was Bessie Chattox, alias Anne Whittle. Life expectancy, if you were lucky, would be 35 if you were lucky. Yeah. And these two had defied the laws of nature. But they lived deep in the forest of Pendle. It was a very, very isolated place. So perhaps they didn't come across many people. Perhaps by being so isolated, they wouldn't contract diseases like other people would do in those days. Yeah.
And would they have had a decent water source there, like a stream that wasn't going to be polluted? For cholera wasn't that prevalent in the 1600s, but any of those kind of waterborne diseases from people living in tight communities, they wouldn't have had that either, I guess, would they? And they'd have had the fresh air and fresh produce.
Yep, certainly. On Pendle Hill, there's lots of little streams that come down from the top, actually. Right. Pendle Hill is it's only 17 feet below being classed as a mountain, but in the year 1612, surrounding it would have been this huge forest, about 50 miles wide, about 27, 28 miles in length, and it would be totally isolated away from dense population.
Yeah. So why was Lancashire so scared of witchcraft in the 1600s?
Well, the area was predominantly Catholic. Right. And at that period of time, we had King James VI of Scotland, who then became King James I of England. And this man was absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. He not only believed that witches existed, he believed they were actually out to get him. Yep. So therefore, on becoming King of England, he had a book which he'd written called the Demonology Book. And the Demonology Book was given to every magistrate in Great Britain for the sole purposes of looking for witches. And this very day you can buy the Demonology Book, and as you open it, how to find a witch, how to try a witch, and most importantly, how to eradicate a witch.
So how do you find a witch then? What was the rules?
Well, you'd have to have reports from the population that something strange was happening. And in the case of the Pendle witches, the main family was the Demdike and Devise family. Demdike, well, that was her name given by the courts at Lancaster, but her real name was Elizabeth Southern. She was over 85 years old, and she lived in a stone hovel, and that's the way we can describe it, a hovel in the Forest of Pendle called Malkin Tower. She'd lost her husband many, many years before, but she did have a daughter living with her called Elizabeth Devise. Right. Elizabeth had 3 children, James, Alison, and the youngest, Jeanette Devise. Every day would be a fight for survival. You'd have to live from day to day. In the summer months, apparently what Elizabeth Southern would do, she would make herbal remedies for sale. But in the winter months, she'd have to beg. She was practically blind, and she would use her granddaughter, Alison Devise, and Alison would link arms with her. They'd go for the forest paths and into villages like Burnley, like Blackburn, like Clitheroe, like Padiham, and there they would beg off travellers that were making their way for the villages. Of course, it was to their advantage to let these people know that they had powers, witchcraft, in other words. And, of course, people would cough it with money. But the story really, Penny, started on the 18th of March, 1612, when Alison Devise, 14 years of age, she left the little stone cottage called Malkin Tower, and she had a walk along the length of Pendle Hill towards the little town of Colne, situated at the very foot of Pendle Hill. Right. There she had the misfortune of meeting a Halifax peddler. When I say peddler, this man was called John Law. He was 52 years old, apparently. He was a walking shop. He had a large pack in his back full of 1612 letters. Alison met him on the Colne to Trawden Road and begged of him, "Oh, please, sir, just a few pins to pin me clothing together, sir. You can spare a few pins, sir, surely. Get away with you. I'm not taking me pack off for you, lass. You got no money." According to John Law, the Halifax peddler, this huge black dog came from nowhere. It had snarling white teeth, glowing red eyes, and the dog sat next to Alison, turned to look at Alison, and according to Law, the dog talked. "Alison, shall I lame him for you?" "Lame him," she screamed. Law felt this terrible pain down his left arm and left leg, and collapsed in absolute agony beneath the foot of Pendle Hill. The kind people of Colne, they could see him. They sent a stretcher party to carry him back into the town of Colne, and they took him to an old alehouse called the Greyhound Inn, which is long, long since gone. Right. There the landlord, John Etherington, spoon-fed John Law. He cleaned him, and as Law's voice returned, he shouted, "I've been cursed! There's a witch on that hill, a young lass called Devise. She's got a dog with her, and I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's in league with devil. Send letters back to me family." Letters were sent back to Halifax, to the Law family, and John Law's eldest son, Abraham, received the first letter. "Hey, me father's in trouble. I better go and collect him." He set off from Halifax, arrived in Colne, and walked into the Greyhound Inn, and saw his father in a twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you, man? You look terrible." "Abraham, I've been cursed. I met this witch, a young lass called Devise. She's got a dog with her. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's in league with devil. I want you, lad, to go and find her and bring her here." Well, Abraham must have been a very, very brave lad. He set off from the town of Colne and walked into the forest of Pendle through these long twisting paths and found this hovel of a cottage with smoke billowing from the chimney above the roof. He hammered on the door. The door was opened by a young boy called James Devise, Alison's brother. And Law shouted, "I want to see Alison Devise. Me father wants to see her. Where is she?" "In here, sir." Alison came to the door. "Right, lass, you're coming with me. You've cursed me father. He wants to see you." She was grabbed by the hand and dragged for the forest of Pendle and down into Colne, where she made her way into the Greyhound Inn and made eye contact with John Law, the Halifax peddler. Law looked up from his sick bed. It's you, York witch. You cursed me last, didn't you? That dog you had. I heard it talk. You're in league with devil, aren't you? This 14-year-old girl, Alison Devise, on bended knees, clasped her hands together in prayer and begged forgiveness. Sir, please forgive me, sir. Please forgive me, sir. I didn't wish to curse you, sir. Please forgive me. John Law, the Halifax peddler, was about to forgive her, but not his son Abraham. Oh, no, we'll have you for this, lass. I'm going to go and get magistrate. Now, the local magistrate was called Roger Noel, and he lived at Reed Hall near Burnley. He was responsible for the whole of the Pendle region. He had his book of demonology, and he knew if he could find this young girl guilty of witchcraft, he was indeed going to curry favour with the king personally. So therefore, he had Alison arrested. She was brought to Reed Hall, where the girl burst into tears, and for the second time inside 24 hours, she admitted to witchcraft, but she gave Roger Noel a lot more information. My grandmother Demdike, she's a witch. So's Bessie Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern. The four of us, we meet in the little stone cottage in Pendle Hill called Malkin Tower. There we meet our familiars. Familiars, said Roger Noel. Yes, sir, we have these dogs. Tib, Ball, Fancy, Dandy. These dogs are our familiars. We get our powers off them, sir. They came to see us over many different eras, sir, and they said we can give you special powers, but in return we need to suckle from your flesh and take your souls. We also, sir, go to Newchurch in Pendle churchyard. We take items from the coffins, sir, such as hair and teeth, sir. We make clay pictures of human beings. We then crumble the clay pictures over the fire, sir, and people die, sir. Roger Noel was actually not scared. He was delighted. He knew he was going to curry favour with King James personally, having known about the king's paranoia towards witchcraft. So therefore, he had Demdike, Chattox and Redfern arrested. These two 85-year-old women, Demdike and Chattox's daughter, Anne Redfern, brought straight to Reed Hall, where they met young Alison Devise. This huge argument took place. They all tried to blame each other. Chattox blamed Redfern, Redfern blamed Demdike, and Alison Devise blamed them all, and even gave dates and times when these familiars came to help them, and described how they'd all made clay pictures of human beings and how they'd all cursed various people. Well, the four of them were then sent straight to the city of Lancaster and thrown into what we call the Well Tower at Lancaster City Castle. It's still there to this very, very day. It's a deep, deep underground dungeon called the Well Tower. There they were chained to the floor in appalling conditions, in total darkness. In the meantime, and this is where the story gets really exciting, Elizabeth Devise, Demdike's daughter and Alison's mother, was furious, and she organised on Good Friday 1612 the witches' meeting at Malkin Tower. Apparently all the so-called witches from the region came into the forest of Pendle. Alison's brother James slaughtered the sheep from Pendle Hill. They dined on mutton. They then got this large cooking vessel called a cauldron and lit a fire beneath the cauldron. The black syrupy liquid inside began to bubble and steam, and into that black bubbling liquid went crushed, powdered human teeth, the odd clay effigy, and indeed the odd human scalp taken from the coffins in Newchurch Cemetery. The whole idea, apparently, was to get a potion together to blow the gates of Lancaster City Castle open and rescue their loved ones. But nothing happened. What did happen, however, is word of this meeting reached the ears of Roger Noel, the local magistrate, and he gave orders that every single person who had attended the Good Friday meeting in the Forest of Pendle at Malkin Tower should be arrested immediately. When word filtered into the forest that the arrests were going to take place, a few people disappeared. In doing so, they saved their lives. However, the ones that were successfully arrested were Jeanette Preston of Gisborne, West Yorkshire, Catherine Hewitt and Alice Gray of the town of Colne, Elizabeth Devise, James Devise, Jeanette Devise of Malkin Tower, Forest of Pendle, John and Jane Bullcock, a mother and son farmers from the village of Blacko beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill, and an incredibly brave lady, as you'll find out later on, called Alice Nutter of Roughlee. They were all sent to the city of Lancaster, with the exception of the two Jeanettes. Jeanette Preston came from Gisborne, West Yorkshire. So therefore she was sent to the city of York and paraded in front of the York City magistrates. There she was found guilty of, first of all, attending the Good Friday meeting at Pendle Hill. She was also found guilty of the murder of her employer, Mr. Thomas Lister. She'd been nursing him. He had died. She wrapped his body in a clean white sheet ready for burial, and 2 days before the burial, she touched the sheeting and some fresh blood oozed out of the body. This was classed as witchcraft, and she became the very, very first of the Pendle witches to be executed in the city of York on Whitmar-Watmergate on the 27th of July, 1612. The other Jeanette, well, she was called Jeanette Devise, the youngest of the Devise children. She was sent to the home of Roger Nowell at Reed Hall, and for the very, very first time in her life, she had a lovely warm bed to sleep in, 3 meals a day, and also some very nice clothes to wear. She had no idea at the time, but Roger Nowell, the local magistrate, was trying to really look after her so that she could indeed be his star witness. King James heard about the arrests and sent 2 circuit judges from the City of London, James Altham and Edmund Bromley. This young boy called Thomas Potts, who was going to be the clerk at the courts. His job was to record absolutely everything. And also Roger Nowell, the local magistrate, and 2 other magistrates, William Holden and John Bannister. The trials began on the 17th of August, 1612. Demdike dies before the trials begin, but under interrogation, she did admit to having a familiar in the form of a dog called Ball, and this dog had come to her many years ago and suckled from her flesh and had given her special powers. She also admitted under interrogation to the murder of 3 local people by making the clay effigy and then crumbling the clay effigy over the fire. And people were dying, well, not necessarily straight away, but certainly after they'd had encounters with her. So Chattox, alias Anne Whittle, was brought up from the well tower, and for the first time inside 4.5 months, she saw daylight. This woman was over 85 years old. She was wearing the same clothes that she'd been arrested in April of that year, and she did not look a pleasant sight. Thomas Potts described her as a skeleton in rags. The accusations against her were indeed witchcraft. She was about to deny them all, but they brought in the star witness, young Jeanette Devise, wearing a lovely new dress which Roger Nowell had just bought her, and he picked her, the little girl, up and put her on top of a desk so the jury could see her. And there young Jeanette told how she'd seen Bessie Chattox at the Good Friday meeting and how she'd admitted to murdering 5 local people by making these clay effigies.
How old would Jeanette have been at this point?
Jeanette was 9 years old, so we are told. She'd had a marvellous 4 months at this gorgeous manor house, and Roger Nowell was really quite chuffed at the information she was giving. Her mother...
What interests me about this, though, thinking about it from a historian point, and I'm loving listening to your storytelling, by the way, Simon, is the recounts of this. Is this all from the book that was written by Thomas Potts?
Yes. Now, one thing I really should bring over here, Penny, is that there was no defence whatsoever, no defence counsel, because, first of all, no one dared take the king on. So really, the only people they had to rely on was the jury. But in the case of Jeanette Preston, when she was sent to the city of York, her husband went with her, and villagers went with her from Gisborne, and they begged for her release. But the judges there said, sorry, the king has signed her death warrant. She was dead before she arrived here. So really with the case of the Pendle witches, there was no defence whatsoever. But as the trial went on, they brought up Elizabeth's device. She, of course, was indeed Jeanette's mother. And Jeanette described how she'd seen her mother with her familiar Fancy, this dog suckling from her, and also how they'd made clay pictures, and also how they'd crumbed the clay pictures over the fire and cursed various people. The trials were going very, very well. Young James Device actually incriminated himself. He told how he had also made these clay effigies, and certainly after the Good Friday meeting, Roger Knowles sent a sheriff of the forest, a young lad called Hargreaves, into the forest of Pendle to Malkin Tower, where James actually helped him unearth a clay effigy which had been buried right next to the cottage itself. So there was a lot of self-incriminating evidence, really. But the people that we did find really, really intriguing would be the three local landowners, if you will, John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son, and this incredible lady called Alice Nutter.
Let's leave that one just there for now, I think.
Okay.
I think we'll come back. We're just going to have a quick break, so he'll go off and grab a quick drink if that's all right. Because I'm looking forward to hearing about Alice, and I've also got a few questions I want to ask about this and some observations I've made of witch trials that I've read about in the past. But hold that thought, Simon. We will be back in about 40 seconds.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
And we're back. Thanks for staying with us. Now, before I rudely interrupted Simon, he was about to tell us all about the landowners, Jane and John Bullock, and Alice Nutter. So where were we going with what's fantastic about them?
Well, with the trials, Penny, we have Elizabeth Device. She's admitted to witchcraft. We have James Device. He's admitted to witchcraft. We have, indeed, Catherine Hewitt. We have Jeanette Preston. We also have a lady called Isabel Roby, who's also admitted to witchcraft. However, three people didn't. John and Jane Bulcock, they were a mother and son, and they owned a large farm. They actually owned the farm at a place called Blackhoe, which is not too far from Pendle Hill. The reason they were arrested, along with this other lady called Alice Nutter, is mainly through Roger Knowles. He does seem to be quite a devious character, really. He's had lots of complaints from people in the Pendle region being accosted by these so-called witches, begging off them all the time. But he's also had a lot of problems with John and Jane Bulcock and Alice Nutter. We'll cover Alice Nutter first of all. Okay. Firstly, in the year 1612, women were not allowed to possess a brain. And it was believed by some men that women didn't even have a brain. And when it came to male chauvinism, women were treated disgustingly at that period of time. Yep. Alice Nutter, she lived at a place called Roughlee, which again is in the shadow of Pendle Hill. Her home is still there to this very day. It's a Grade 1 listed building, a gorgeous building called Roughlee Hall. It just shows how wealthy she and her husband were. They owned a lot of land.
Right.
Now, Alice got very, very annoyed with other people in the area, other farmers that were pushing her fencing back, taking sheep and cattle, and she got very, very annoyed about it. Mm-hmm. She said to her husband, look, I'm a woman. I can't complain, but you can. You're a man. You need to go to Lancaster, to the courts in Lancaster, to get our land disputes sorted. I'm too scared, he said. So therefore, Alice Nutter made this very brave decision of going to Lancaster and going straight to the courts with all her charts, all her maps of the area as a woman. And as she walked into the courts, People shouted, "There's a woman! It's a woman! Get her out! It's a woman! Get her out!" Alice grabbed hold of furniture. They tried to tug her and pull away from the court, but she wouldn't let go. So therefore the judges said, "Let her have her say." And in one afternoon, Alice Nutter won all her land dispute charges. She won them all.
Wow.
In doing so, she made a real enemy of Roger Noel, the magistrate. She'd embarrassed him. And therefore he thought, I need to get rid of this woman. I'm also having problems with John and Jane Bulcock complaining about land disputes as well. And I've got these people in the forest of Pendle who are also causing me lots of worries and troubles. He had his star witness, young Jeanette Devise. He picked her up and put her on top of the desk, and in front of the jury, he said to young Jeanette, "Jeanette, these three people here, John and Jane Bulcock and Alice Nutter, were they at the Good Friday meeting in the Forest of Pendle? Did you see them that night?" "I did, sir," she said. A look of shock and horror came across John and Jane, and indeed Alice's face, as they realised they were indeed being incriminated for witchcraft. They were found guilty of witchcraft. In the case of the Bulcocks, they were found guilty of turning a young girl called Jean Mead completely insane. She lived some 17 miles away, apparently. In the case of Alice Nutter, she was found guilty of aiding Demdike and Alison Devise in the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughly because he wouldn't give her a penny. In court, she made a plea of not guilty. "I don't need to beg. I don't know these people. I'm a woman of wealth." But to use a modern term, she knew she had indeed been well and truly stitched up.
Yeah, sounds it. Sounds it. That's actually putting a very interesting slant on the whole thing. I mean, firstly, I find it very hard to believe that all these women would have said, "Yeah, hands up, I'm a witch," because you knew full well that by admitting to being a witch, you were dead. And the only reason I can see for saying, "Yes, I'm a witch," is them saying, "Look, if you admit you're a witch, we're going to stop doing all these interrogation things on you, and you can ask for forgiveness and you can go away." That's the only reason why you'd admit to it. But I'm sure Alice sounds like a pretty clever lady. She must have known that this magistrate was doing it out of retribution.
She would have known that. She really, really would have known this. I look at her really as quite a brave woman, actually, as a very, very brave woman. But the fact is, you see, Noel had used his star witness, this young girl called Jeanette Devise. He'd looked after her. She had nice clothes to wear, a lovely warm bed to sleep in, and
she's
of course,
she's not going to want to risk losing that.
She really enjoyed her life at Reed Hall, from living in poverty. In real poverty in this little hovel in the centre of the forest. What is, again, very, very touching, and it is mentioned in Thomas Potter's book, that when the Pendle were all led out on the 20th of August 1612, city of Lancaster, they went to what's called the pillory, a horrible place of execution. They had ropes around their necks, had to climb onto a rostrum, and then the rostrum removed from underneath them. It has been said, but never ever confirmed. I've heard this story from my grandmother who lived in Cone, and my mother as well, that as the rope was placed around Alice's neck, she bravely turned and saw this huge crowd gathering to watch the execution. Before the stools were kicked out from underneath them, she caught the eye of Roger Noel, who was holding the hand of young Jeanette Devise, and she shouted, "I shall haunt you for the rest of your life," and then the stools kicked out from underneath them. Young Jeanette was there that day. She watched the whole family perish and the three farmers as well. And she apparently was holding the hand of Noel. And as soon as the whole family stopped twitching on the pillory, they passed away. Noel said, "Goodbye." She said, "What do you mean goodbye? I'm not going back to that lovely hall of yours. Goodbye." He had used her. And she made the long, long journey from Lancaster back to the Forest of Pendle, back to a cold and empty little cottage. And she must have burst into tears, realising that her evidence had claimed the life of her grandmother, her mother, her brother and sister, the three local farmers, along with Catherine Hewitt, who lived in Cone.
Do we know what happened?
Yes, we do know what happened to her. Some 4 years later, she was rearrested and sent back to Lancaster on a charge of witchcraft.
Right.
She was then sent down to London, inspected in London, and they did find some unusual marks on her private parts, would you believe?
Right.
Which they couldn't really describe. She was then sent back to Lancaster, sent down to London, and then the case was dropped. The case was brought forward by a young boy called Edmund Robinson, who admitted to fabricating the whole stories of lies against her. You could say that witchcraft, or the suspicion surrounding it, absolutely ruined that young girl's life.
Yeah.
But I must just add, Penny, that as a member of the Tourism Association, in 2012 we had the 400th anniversary of this event, and we all got together and we thought we need to do something for Alice. And for the Lottery Commission, we raised enough money to unveil a statue to Alice Nutter in her home
Alice,
village.
Is it? That's Alice. I've seen the pictures of the statue. I didn't
Yes.
know who it was. That's for. Wow. Okay.
But what we did insist, Penny, is that her back was pointed towards Lancaster.
Right.
She's in chains, as she would be, and she has a look of real innocence on her face. But the statue has become very, very much a symbol of female rights. Yeah. And as I speak to you, I can guarantee right now there'll be flowers placed beneath her, in her hands, because in all fairness, and I agree with this statement, Alice Nutter lost her life not because of witchcraft, but because she was a woman.
She had a womb, yeah.
She had a brain, and she knew how to use it, and she was falsely incriminated by this magistrate, Roger Noel, by using this little girl. As she quite rightly said at the start of the interview, Penny, they say that the so-called witches weren't tortured, but James Devise, when he was brought into court, the lad was so malnourished he was dropping in and out of consciousness.
Yeah.
Bessie Chattox was a skeleton in rags.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, they could have been told, if you admit to witchcraft, you can go home.
Yeah.
Because it's so unusual to get all these confessions. And for all we know, the evidence against them could just have been fabricated. Because a lot of it was, very, very, very unusual. In the case of, shall we say, Alison Devise and her grandmother, Demdike, one story is that they made their way from the forest of Pendle into Burnley, onto the home, the land of a chap called John Baldwin. John Baldwin was a miller. He was grinding flour. He was making loaves of bread. And these two would be starving, and they begged a loaf of bread off him. And he said, "Get off my land. You've got no money. Get off my land." According to Baldwin, Demdike turned round and saw his baby daughter in a cot. And according to Baldwin said that Demdike said, "If you don't give us some bread, we'll curse your daughter." Well, some 22 months later, the little girl became ill and died. 22 months later, and this was classed as witchcraft. Certainly in the case of John Law, the Halifax peddler, many historians believe that what actually happened is that he had a stroke. He had a stroke because his left arm, his left leg, and the left side of his face were completely paralysed. And
well, even he was in his 50s, so he would have been well past the average age.
He would,
well.
And of course,
he would have been the equivalent of someone in their 80s now.
Very much so, yeah.
So
very
the
much
probability of some kind of aneurysm or stroke, or I was thinking maybe he was drunk. Was my thoughts as you were describing it, that he'd been drinking or something. But I think it's the fact that with today's, if you look at it in today's rules, you'd think all that evidence was circumstantial. It was all hearsay. There was no, if they were witches, that they should have been able to curse someone there and then. A 22-month lead-in to someone dying is ridiculous. And with the child mortality, when we know now child mortality and everything else back then, it wouldn't have been unusual for children to die in the first 3 or 4 years. And if you look at even going forward 100, 200 years, you look at birth records and stuff, well, most families had 10, 15 children because so many of them died before the age of 5 years old. And it's one of the things that's always smacked me as being very, very, it's against women, and especially women who are either a bit unusual, i.e. they look a bit different, or they have a different way of life, i.e. they don't need a man to to look after them, and they maybe did have a couple of dogs or a couple of cats to keep them company. I mean, we've all heard of the mad cat woman and stuff. I mean, Bridget Jones dreamt of being eaten by her German shepherds, didn't she? As a single woman. So, things like that aren't unusual, but if you're looking for excuses, you could almost they kind of were making the evidence fit.
Oh yes,
the crime.
Yeah.
And when you get things like, they would say, oh, if a cattle had died, it was a witch had put a curse on you. So you go back as far as you can to when did the local nut job say something nasty to you that you could say that was actually a curse, and now it's actually come to fruition because you want to get rid of them. Or, in the way the Alice Nutter and the Bultcocks, that this guy obviously wanted to get them out of his case because they were annoying him, and he felt threatened or emasculated maybe by someone like Alice Nutter, who could argue a case.
That's right. That's right.
What's the easiest charge to bring? Because there is no real way of proving if someone is innocent or guilty, and is guilty until, guilty really. I mean, if we go forward sort of 30 years, and I've been fascinated by this Alice Nutter, and thank you for that. I really appreciate that. You look at sort of the Matthew Hopkins witch trials in the 1640s, and a lot of his were people supposedly saying, "Yes, I'm a witch, hands up." But then when you look at the torture that they went through, although it wasn't allowed to be called torture then, dropping them off church towers so their arms would break. The theory being, if the rope broke and they flew, they were therefore a witch. If the rope broke and they fell, they weren't a witch. Oh, bye-bye, you're going to be buried, sort of thing.
It stood no chance.
They stood no chance. No. And he was Matthew Hopkins. Say 30 years on from this, wouldn't even have been born when the Pendle witch trials took place. He was, as we were saying earlier, I think he was a serial killing con man. Personally, he was conning these places out of money. This one is a bit different because Roger Knowles wasn't conning people out of money. He wasn't like he was travelling around the northwest.
No.
Have you got a witch that you want me to try? Which is what Hopkins was doing down south.
Yes.
But I find it very hard to believe that all these people would have said, "Yep, hands up, I'm a witch. I've been making effigies. I've been boiling people's skulls."
Yes.
Because they would have known damn well what have happened to them. So, but how did the other group, the I think it was 8 of them, wasn't there? There's
Samlesbury Hall witches.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were arrested at exactly the same time.
Right.
But
by Roger
when
Knowles?
you look at Roger Knowell, I mean, he knew all about the king's paranoia, and the king was literally paranoid about witchcraft. He was so paranoid. And just before I answer the question about the Samlesbury Hall witches, after the 1612 trials at Lancaster, Roger Knowell was summoned down to London and knighted by the king personally, and made the High Sheriff of Lancashire. Thomas Potts wrote his book, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, earned him a fortune. The 2 circuit judges, James Altham and Edmund Bromley, are also knighted. So they've done very, very well out of the trial. They've done extremely well out of the trial.
Out of the murders, basically.
They have indeed. But in the next cell to the Pendle witches were 3 women. A rather beautiful young girl of the name of Jane Southworth. And she came from a very, very wealthy family from Samlesbury Hall. The Southworth family were extremely wealthy people. And Jane had 2 friends, Jeanette and Ellen Brearley. They were twin sisters. They had been dining at Samlesbury Hall when the king's authorities came into the Long Gallery and arrested all 3 of them on a charge of witchcraft. And they were sent straight to the city of Lancaster and put in the cell right next door to the Pendle witches. They never saw the Pendle witches, but they could probably knew there was someone in the next cell. On the 20th of August 1612, Jane heard this huge roar outside the castle. She climbed on the shoulders of her 2 best friends and looked out of the cell window. There in the distance, she saw the Pendle witches actually hanging and blowing in the wind. She then heard the sounds of footsteps that got louder and louder. The key was placed in the lock of her cell door. The door was opened, and there was Mr. Thomas Cavell, the head jailer of Lancaster City Castle. "Right, you 3. We just dealt with that lot. It's your turn next. Follow me." The 3 of them must have been terrified as they made their way up the twisting staircase and into the same courts that had only 30 minutes previously dispatched the Pendle witches. Standing in front of them was James Altham, Edmund Bromley, Thomas Potts, Roger Nowell, William Holden, and John Bannister, the prosecution. There was no defence whatsoever, similar to the Pendle Witch case, but they also brought in a child witness, a 6-year-old girl called Grace Sarberts. Grace was the daughter of the head gardener at Sarsby Hall. She was brought into the courts, and the judges said, "Right, young lady, read out your testimony against these 3 witches." "I will, sir. I was walking along the banks of the River Ribble, sir. It was a hot summer's day. I saw Jane Southworth, Jeanette and Ellen Brearley from Sarsby Hall swimming in the river, sir. I then saw these 3 unusual dogs. I've never seen the like before, sir. They were very unusual dogs, big black heads, large bodies, cloven hooves. They jumped into the water, sir, and materialised into human beings. They picked up all 3 women. They danced in a circle. They then paired off for a meal. I then watched from a distance, sir, as fraternisation took place, these demonic spectres. On the second day, Ellen Brearley came running towards me. She changed, sir, into a dog, and she tried to suffocate me into a blanket of straw, but I escaped, sir. On the third day, I was approached by Jane Southworth, Ellen and Jeanette once again, sir. They said, "Would I like to have a bit of fun?" I said, "What do you mean, fun?" "We'd like to go to the home of Mr. Thomas Walshman of Sarsby Hall. He's got a little boy. He's only just been born. He hasn't been christened yet. So we'd like to drink his blood." "No, no, no," said young Grace. "I don't want to get involved in that." Sir, in the dead of night, they went to Sarsby Hall. They crept into the sleeping quarters of the Walshman family, sir. They lifted the little boy from the cradle, and over 4 nights they pierced his stomach and drank his blood. He then died of blood loss, sir, and was buried at Sarsby Church. In the dead of night, sir, they came back. They dug up the coffin. They took the baby's body out of the coffin. They boiled the baby's flesh, sir. They ate the flesh and kept some of the body oils that would enable them to change shape. James Altham, the judge, was absolutely furious. He brought the gavel up. "We find the 3 of you guilty of witchcraft. You'll die like the rest of them." Before the gavel came down, Jane Southworth pulled off a short miracle. "Sir, I beg of you, sir, to cross-examine this young girl, sir. She has been manipulated by a Catholic priest." Just that one word, Catholicism, made the judges sit back. You're an Anglican, you say?" "I am, sir. I'm married, sir, into the Southworth family. They're all Catholics, sir. They hate me, sir, because of my Anglican views, sir. This young girl has been manipulated to falsely incriminate myself and my 2 best friends, sir. Please cross-examine her." They took Grace next door. A short while later, Grace came in with tears streaming down her cheeks, and the judges reassembled the court. "On the light of new evidence, we find you, Jane Southworth, you, Jeanette and Ellen Brearley, innocent of the crimes against you. You are free to go." The 3 of them hugged each other. They jumped for joy. And as they left Lancaster City Castle, Jane turned round and saw the Pendle Witches still hanging there and blowing in the breeze. They saw at the end of the pillory 3 empty nooses. Oh. And Jane realised she had not only saved her life, but the lives of her 2 best friends. But the story gets even better, Penny. For many years, historians have argued about the Pendle Witches and the Sarsby Hall Witches, about certain facts. But as recently as 1901, a good 300 years after the event took place, 2 local doctors met in a public house in the village of Worley, near Clitheroe. Over a glass of stout, they discussed the Pendle Witches and the Sarsby Hall Witches. And Dr. Whitaker said to Dr. Dawson, "I believe Grace Sarberts may just have been telling the truth. The way she described those 3 dogs are rather similar to Tib, Ball and Fancy. Those 3 dogs belong to Demdike, Chattox and Alison Devise. Secondly, let's get permission from the Church of England to exhume the Walshman grave." Right. And this they did. For the Church of England, they made their way to Sarsby Church. They got the grave records and they found the exact plot and they started to dig. They came across a 1612 child's lozenge-shaped coffin. It was opened under Church of England supervision and found to contain absolutely nothing. Who knows? Grace Sarbatts may just have been telling the truth. We shall never, ever know.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. The fact that they, just mentioning religion almost saved their lives.
The word Catholicism through Lancashire would have been, it was totally legal. Now, again, going back to the Pendle Witches, in the case of Alice Nutter, she made a plea of not guilty along with John and Jane Bulkett. They both pleaded not guilty, but Alice, many people believe, was a Catholic also. And the one thing she couldn't explain on Good Friday was why she wasn't in church that day. This didn't help really. Yeah. And people believe that she may just have been harbouring a Catholic priest. We do know at her home at Ruffley Hall, beautiful building, Penny, you'd love it, there are indeed concealed priest holes. There's also priest holes at Samlesbury Hall as well, which are in magnificent condition, because the Catholic faith was very, very strong in this part of the world.
Yeah, it still is, isn't it?
Preston.
My grandmother, who the other thing I said to you was from Lee, was a staunch Catholic.
Oh yes, yeah.
So I think it is still. I mean, I remember in Lee the amount of Catholic churches as you walked around the city, the town, city. I'm not sure which it is. Is it a town or is it a city? Town.
Lee would come into Greater Manchester, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a town. Yeah. I just remember when I was little the amount of Catholic churches, and that they were Catholic. They weren't any other sort of denomination. It was fascinating. But one of the things I found when I was doing my research for this show was an article in the BBC News pages from 2011, and it was the discovery of a 17th century cottage, complete with complete with a cat skeleton that was in the walls. And you're listed as being the expert on Pendle Witches, in that you said in terms of significance, it's like discovering Tutankhamun's tomb.
I've got to say, Penny, I'd really forgotten about that. But what actually happened? It was 2012.
Right.
The 400 years. It was Christmas 2012, and I got this very excited telephone call from United Utilities, the water authority, from a lovely chap, one of the directors, and he said, "Simon, our engineers have been working at Blackhoe on one of the dams near Blackhoe, the home of John and Jane Bulkett.
Right.
And they saw behind the dam a rocky knoll. They thought, well, let's have an exploratory dig. And they came across the roof of a very, very old building. They thought this is no work for water engineers. And they contacted the authorities. And they sent a team from Loughborough University, to excavate the cottage. They did do, and that's when I got this telephone call. And I felt so honoured that they should want me to have a look at it. And I did do, and as I walked into the building, it was like walking back in time. Right. I then met the professor from archaeology at Loughborough, a marvellous chap, and he said, "Simon, when we got to this wall here, we found a recess. We very, very carefully removed the bricks, and we found the skeletons of, we think, 2 or 3 cats. From the shape of where they've been placed, we think it's very likely they were placed and they're alive. And this is typical of Pendle witch folklore, to leave what's called a familiar spirit. A witch apparently has to have a familiar. And if your building is protected by other familiar spirits, then no evil can get into the building. It's almost like a protection, if you will. They certainly put the remains in Tupperware dishes. I did see them. But what was amazing, they had a press release that day, and the worldwide interest was absolutely amazing. We had Good Morning America live from Pendle Hill. We had the Canadian TV people there, Australian, New Zealand, German. Wow. The Germans found it very, very fascinating. Right. And I've got to say, it really was amazing how the cottage should be found in 2012, 400 years after the event. What we did find, Penny, is half the building was dated back to 1580, which means it would have stood at the time of the Pendle Witches, but there'd been an extension, an early an early Georgian extension.
Right.
Why the building had been buried, we don't know, but the archaeologists believed it's been buried for a good 250 years.
Wow. Yeah, it's why it had been buried, though, is the interesting fact.
Exactly.
There must be so many buildings that haven't been discovered. I know whenever I used to sort of drive to Lancashire and you'd see the reservoirs and you'd see these like little stone buildings just dotted around with no roads going to them, no tracks. They're almost like in the middle of nowhere and derelict. And I always used to want to get out and go and look at them. Obviously, I couldn't, but that would be an amazing thing to have seen. So
it really was. It was fascinating, really.
Fascinating. Find it almost like finding the Mary Celeste. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
everything's still there. It's just not been touched.
Yeah. The archaeological team did find evidence of what had been eaten. They found the remains of. When I say an oven, it was actually a recess in the wall where you put some sticks in there to heat things up, etc. And they again carbon dated this again to the 1580 period around there. It was quite amazing, really.
Wow. Oh, that's one of the things I love about history. It's yeah. So before we sort of bring this to a close, I've got to ask: any paranormal experiences on your tours?
With the Pendle Witch tours, we do get a lot of companies like Dusk Till Dawn, Fright Nights, haunted inns, haunted buildings, haunted happenings. And with the haunted happenings team, they come from Nottingham. They have a marvellous medium called Caroline Lee. She's quite an amazing woman, actually. I would buy a second-hand car off her, I must say. I tell the whole story, like I have done tonight, at Malkin Tower, the area where the old cottage stood all those years ago.
Right. That
which
would
does
be
have
Demdike's cottage, yeah?
That's quite correct.
Yeah.
From Malkin Tower, the area. Of course, there's a huge difference in the 21st century to what it used to be, of course. But I tell the story, and then Caroline takes over. And what has happened on a few occasions, Penny, I can't actually describe it really, but this beautiful aroma comes from nowhere. It's like walking into a flower shop. It's a very, very beautiful, sweet, and that's the way I can describe it, a very sweet, sugary scent. It's a beautiful scent. It only happens when Caroline's there. I don't know what she does, how she does it, but she does have this habit of conjuring up something from the other side.
Wow. Maybe she's got a link to them that even she doesn't know about.
It's possible. What I can tell you, and for listeners, if they'd like to go to Google search, go to what's called the White Witch of Pendle Hill, and you will see the last piece of snow melting on the side of Pendle Hill in the perfect shape of a witch. This has happened more than once in the last 15 years, and it really is quite intriguing. It really is. It shows a witch, the perfect shape of a witch. Wow. And certainly, if you were to visit Pendle Hill on Halloween, Pendle Hill looks more like Wembley Stadium. Yeah. And what I do like about the story really is that there's a brewery in Burnley called Morehouses. Right. They have a range of real ales, all named after all these incredible characters.
Really? Wow. Can't believe I used to go up to Lancashire all the time and I didn't know this information. Wow. Well, on that note, I think that's a good base to stop talking about Pendle. But what have you got going on for yourself at the moment, Simon? What's in your world? What would you like to? We mentioned your tours, and people can access them. You've got a Facebook page, Top Hat Tours. You've got your website that they can go on as well. Very accessible. I can confirm this. You're very easy to get hold of to ask questions to. Well, have you got anything else going on that you want to mention?
Right. Well, I've written a book called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. Okay. And they're all my favourite stories from all the tours I do. From the city of York right down to Kendal, right across into Lancashire, etc. And my real love is storytelling, really, Penny.
I can tell.
I do find that ghost stories will get the imagination of anyone, really.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I did win a National Tourism Award from Visit England. And as a result, I was invited down to Tower Bridge, London, to meet other winners of a similar award, really. And there I met a lovely guy called Phil, and Phil does Jack the Ripper tours.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story which I think we all find fascinating, really.
Yeah.
But I've done quite a few tours with him, and when the lad's gone on holiday, I've taken over just to cover. And I've got to say that story does absolutely fascinate me. But what I do is because all of Whitechapel's disappeared from that period of time, the only place left now is Mitre Square in London, where Catherine Eddowes sadly lost her life. But I do a version in Clitheroe where we use all the characters, all the stories. And Clitheroe has these beautiful old Victorian lamps and cobbled streets and little ginnels. Yeah. And so I do my own version of Jack the Ripper. It's a bit like a stage production, if you will, but it's very much the whole story from start to finish, which I thoroughly enjoy. I've got lots of coach tours, and I've also got, on next Wednesday, a team from Channel 4 that are going to do a documentary on the Pendle Witches, and of course they'll hear something very, very similar to what you've just heard tonight, Penny. Really.
So do we know when that's likely to be actually going out?
It'll be filmed next Wednesday.
Right. And do we know when it will be on television?
I really don't know.
Well, you'll have to let us know when you know.
And I will definitely let you know, Penny.
We'll add it to the page. But it's been an absolute joy talking to you, Simon. I could have sat and listened to you. It's only because of time restraints I had to keep interrupting to get.
Of course.
But I sense a revisit at some point. If that's
Thank
okay,
you.
we can talk about York, as that's another one of your loves.
Yes,
We could possibly even touch on the good old Essex boy himself. Well, I say good old Essex boy. He wasn't that good a boy, but he's an interesting one. Mr. Dick Turpin. I think that would be a nice one to talk about at some point, as he's got a pretty good history with York. But it really has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to sort of send Simon a message, do so on his website, do so on his Facebook page. And it's as you can probably tell, I've sat and listened to this and actually managed to keep quiet for at least 5 minutes at a time, which for me is quite it's unusual. So if you want to hear more, you want to go on one of Simon's tours, please do go up to Lancashire and go on one. So just listening to tonight's show, there's so much more I could have asked, but I didn't want to. Because I didn't want to detract from the story. But thank you again, Simon. I really appreciate
your
Penny. Time tonight and talking about the show. If anyone wants to listen to this show again, you can do. It will be available for download once the programme has finished going out live. And all that really leaves me to say is thank you ever so much for listening. Have a good night, and just don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.